Quentin Mills, Nick Hathcote joined as always. Smitty is out today, but he will join back in as the season progresses. We're going to be going through our 2025 college baseball preseason guide. If you have not downloaded your copy, never fear. If you like books being read to you, that's what we're doing basically today. Nick, Q, how we doing, boys?
It's been a rough few days in the DMV as the national news has been covered, so it's glad to put that aside for a little while and talk baseball.
Nick?
Yeah, we're 2 weeks away from, as you guys know, the early morning 2 a.m. staying up till 2 a.m., 3 a.m.s, because that's when the books release baseball lines on the weekends sometimes. So get your sleep while you can, but definitely excited. This should be a great season again. College baseball is growing. The betting community in college baseball is growing. So this should be an awesome season.
Already with the comments, no hair gel for the opening show. I didn't. I'm rocking the hat. I'm growing my hair out, so it's in that like real ugly phase right now. So a lot of ball caps, saving a fortune on hair products. I appreciate it.
Got a little mini mullet in the back.
Do what?
You got a little mini mullet with the wingtips?
Pretty much. I mean, it's fitting for Arkansas.
As it is.
Speaking of mullets, Tony Vitello gets the cover here. That's the inspiration behind Growing the Flow. So, again, if you haven't gone through the guide, that's basically what we're going to be doing on this show. Give you a little preview on our futures tickets, anything we like. We're still kind of settling in. We've got Circa that just posted odds, I think, yesterday. DraftKings, maybe earlier in the week. There's a lot of variation out there. I talked about it on Jeff's show. I think Virginia, probably the biggest surprise to me, because Circa, I believe Jeff Davis over there hung it at 10-1. And I believe Quentin and I got it, 22, 23-1 back on Bet Rivers when that opened up. So a lot of variation out there, a lot of different opinions from these odds makers. Large in part to D1 baseball coming out with their top 25 rankings. Stuff started shifting around. Anything else you want to talk about as we get into the transfer portal by 64 analytics and the top 25?
I think the most consistent books, like if you're trying to figure out what those big gaps number-wise, like where to take it, obviously jump on a number that you're going to benefit greatly from. But it seems like Circa, they're a little behind in terms of like dropping it, but it seems like they're pretty accurate in kind of the intel they have on the teams, as well as DraftKings. Bet Rivers, it seems like the last two seasons have kind of had the mindset like just be the first book out, maybe catch some action early. But I typically go off of Circa and DraftKings. I think that gives you a good idea of kind of where the teams are expected to perform. So that's just something to keep an eye on when you're kind of number watching.
Yeah, just for comparison's sake, so you've got Bet Rivers, Texas A&M's plus 700 at Circa. They're plus 600. Virginia's plus 950 at Circa, 15-1 on Bet Rivers. Tennessee 11-1 or 11-1 at Circa, but plus 800 on Bet Rivers. So definitely shop around. There's still a lot of discrepancies out there as far as what odds makers. And I know Jeff personally, and I trust his handicapping. We've bounced ideas off of each other. So when he says Tennessee is a little overrated by books like DraftKings and FanDuel and Bet Rivers, I trust that. I know Nick probably doesn't want to hear it, but it's hard to go back to back. Not since South Carolina did it in 2010, 2011. Couldn't even place $10.
Yeah, that's a big.
It's doing that to everybody. Yeah, right now.
That's so dumb. So dumb. Okay. Yeah. So we did the rankings last year with the basically taking D1 analytics or D1 baseball's analytics of the scouting scale. And then I formula that into a graded scale. So that's where the A plus, A minus, B, whatever comes into play here. Last year, I think Tennessee was B minus in pitching. They ended up having a really solid pitching staff. So it can be wrong. Don't hang your hat on it. Arkansas, A plus in pitching. We'll see. I think B in fielding, B plus in hitting or C plus in hitting is probably a little bit of what they did last year because they really sucked at hitting, even though they were a B in hitting last year. I think that should flip flop. So, a couple outliers here. I know Florida C- in fielding. They should actually be a lot better than that. So, Q, you can talk about that. I wanted to explain this a little further because I didn't get to go into any detail within the guide as far as how these ratings came into effect.
I'll let Nick jump in, but I'll say this before we compared Matt, you and I off the air last year to this year. When you look at the teams, right, you see all these, you see a C at number 5, Arkansas. Last year, we did the same ratings, used the same scale. We didn't see a C until like number 12 in the rankings. So it's just kind of interesting to go from last year, what we considered a stacked, top 10 to this year, which, I still think it's a pretty strong 10. But you're seeing a lot of those more rigorous or more harsh grading higher up on the standings. So for me, that's kind of something that I'll take a look at throughout the season. Obviously, hopefully for Arkansas's sake, Florida's sake, and Tennessee, maybe these are wrong on the positive end. But it's just something that I caught my eye that was pretty interesting from our guide last year to this year. Nick, obviously you weren't with us last year. We're happy to have you here. What's your thoughts? When you kind of see these grades, just kind of quickly before we move on.
Yeah, I will say I was surprised when they came out and like what we came up with, because they are kind of harsh, as you mentioned. Like these are the supposed to be top 25 teams in the country. I hate to see teams in the 200s, team 305, just straight Fs. But yeah, so like in some of these, obviously it's early. It's so early to tell now with the transfer portal, and we'll kind of get into that here in a bit. Like we know Arkansas, like it says C+ for hitting, but with what they brought in and kind of what they brought back and guys improving, like we saw a couple guys for them in the Cape completely improve or look a lot better in the Cape, which was surprising than they even did during the regular season with wood bats. So that is something that can possibly change. Florida State is like, that's something like the hitting that's so up in the air. That's one where all of us agree, like, hey, they have talent. He's going to continue to bring in talent. And we know Max Williams is going to put up numbers, and Lodis is going to put up numbers, but it's so early to tell. These numbers are harsh, but I think it kind of should give everybody who looks at it an idea of kind of where teams, at least where they stack up in the top 25, kind of against each other, and why teams are ranked number 6 versus ranked number 15.
Yeah, and they are harsher rankings. I think the sport of college baseball, it's almost like the rich got richer and the poor got poorer when it comes to the transfer portal. So there is a lot more parity at the top, and then it's kind of like a big gap, and then everybody else, which is where you kind of saw last year with UC Santa Barbara, Northeastern. They all come in with a lot of hype, but then what can you do? I mean, when you're dealing with the lineup stacked top to bottom like Tennessee last year, Texas A&M this year, it doesn't really matter how good your ace was. You're going up against a completely different skill set of competition. So to have something that's a little harsher as far as the grading scale goes, to show the discrepancy between these teams, I think, because if you look at just say Texas A&M, we know their lineup's going to be stacked A+ in hitting. Compare that to Tennessee or Arkansas, who lost a lot or / didn't do very good last year. That probably is the difference in a grade scale. So just keep that in mind as you're going through it. I'm going to slide back to 64 Analytics. Now, this is another thing I wanted to explain. Nick, or do you want to explain it? Because I had to explain it to you. The rankings is not like how they did, because if you go over and look at players in the portal, Tennessee gets the number 2, number 3,
number 11.
It's number 11 ranked players. However, this ranking is taking how did they improve? So Tennessee winning it all last year, they did not improve by picking up Liam Doyle, for instance, from Ole Miss. He would actually be a downgrade, in my opinion, from their starting pitching staff last year. So this is just taking like which teams made the biggest improvement through the portal only. No recruiting, no anything else, just that. So you've got LSU at number 1. The big thing here, I highlighted in bold, 10 top 250 player additions. They lost 4. Arkansas brought in 7, lost 0. Georgia brought in 10, lost 0, on and so forth. So that's how you read that. Georgia really surprises me. They were good last year, but how much of it was just because Charlie Condon, their pitching staff is mediocre for the SEC. Are you buying Georgia this year? Either of you? That Omaha team?
I'm not, and we'll get into that a little further, but
Okay, good.
I think so.
I just think they're the team they could have the most potential. Like they're one of those.
That's fair.
We'll get into it and we'll see. Like once we talk about who they got from the portal, like they got some major arms, which they didn't have last year. Their bullpen's actually going to be able to get people out, which last year didn't matter if they were up 8 in the sixth inning. Everybody's like, "Oh, hold on."
Oh, you were sweating the cover. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they have the chance to be the most improved and like skyrocket from where they're at, but it's wait and tell, and we'll get into it, like you said.
All right, so Texas A&M, they come in as pretty much everybody's number one overall. Biggest question mark for me, though, is you bring in Mike Early because the coach just skipped town an hour after he lost the College World Series, basically. We saw Jay Johnson do it. They're going to be able to win games. It doesn't worry me that he is a first-year head coach down in College Station. I think Prager is good. I don't think he's Paul Skeen's good. They may have a Dylan Cruz, Trey Morgan there, like power bats. Jay Slaviolette, we know him. Grahovac, we know him. They're going to be stacked. But is this the team that is so good but can't get it done and miss Omaha? Because I think they're more likely to get to a super regional, get into a really gritty game 3, and then lose, being the better team, the best team, like Tennessee did 2 years ago or 3 years ago now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think this has 2022 Tennessee vibes. Like when you look at the lineup, you just said it. I mean, it's stacked. There's impact hitters. You could put the whole starting 9, Caden Kent, some other guys to name.
Yeah.
The pitching is good too. Same with the 2022 Tennessee team, right? Like they're going to win their regular season games, the SEC tournament games. Like they're going to be there. I wouldn't be like no one's going to be surprised if they go win a national title, and you could see that why on paper. But I don't think if you truly study the game, like I wouldn't be surprised if you have another 22 Tennessee team in the name of Texas A&M this year, because not only do you have a team that played, for a national championship last year, right? Like that's heartbreaking. That's motivation as well. What do you do with that motivation? How do you handle that? And then they had an off season that no team has ever had before in a modern era of college baseball. Mike Early is for the guys, right? The whole team went to bat for him, but that is so much pressure to deal with as a first-year head coach, because people forget he left too and then was brought back. Like he didn't say, "Hey, thanks, I'll see you down the road." Like he was like, "I'm going to sign the deal." Wasn't smiling in the press pictures at Texas, and then he comes back. To navigate that through a whole season, I think the biggest thing is like how exhausting is that going to be for them? The narrative, what's going on in Austin versus College Station. Like, is this going to be too much? I think that's the biggest storyline here.
Nick?
I think for me, this reminds me of 23 LSU. Like we remember how good that 22 team was. We remember you talked about Cruz, you talked about Morgan. That team was so good. And then they brought in a couple pieces. Obviously, Paul Skeens helps. But then you bring in a couple, like all you needed was 2 or 3 transfers for that 23 team, and they kind of put them over the top. I think that's kind of where I have this A&M team. Obviously, like Q said, this is the most talented team on paper. I don't think anybody can argue that. It's not really close. Yeah, it's not really close. I think what does help them, and kind of opposite of Q, like just to be devil's advocate of what Q says, yes, there's going to be a ton of pressure. Mike Early's going to have, like every time they lose a game, if they lose a series, it's going to be what's going on, what's happening. But I think you can also flip it by the fact that all those kids wanted to stay and chose to stay. This is a team that is loaded up with guys that just got beat in a 3-game series against Tennessee in the College World Series championship game. So they all know what it's like. They have experience. They should be extremely hungry because of that, and they all stuck around for a reason. So I think it can go 2 ways. Like, yes, they could give into the pressure, or they could not let it get to them and just say, "Hey, we have a chip on our shoulder. We felt like we should have won it last year." Like, imagine without a couple injuries like Shane Sadeo and obviously Braden Montgomery getting hurt. Like, they think they should have won it anyways. So I think there's so much, like, these guys want to get back there. I think you can look at it that way. And this is obviously the favorite to win it all.
So looking at their schedule as I get it pulled up here, they start the season against Elon. They don't really have a tough test until Arizona at the end of February, which is
That's how
down
they
in
lined it up
Houston.
last year too.
Do what?
They were like that last year too. McNeese
So
State, Smalls.
I say that to say we may not know how good this team is until that Arizona, Oklahoma State 1-2 series. They get Rice too, but
they haven't been anything
real. The Owls.
Yeah.
They open SEC play against Alabama. May not
another interesting team
either.
Yeah, that's what I wrote up. Yeah, SEC they start with Bama, Vandy, Kentucky, Tennessee. So it's not an easy four. So it could be something where, like, hey, if they only win 2 out of those series, does the pressure kick in? Because that's when we'll know. Like, if they win all 4 of those series, it's probably just like, all right, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see in June.
And they may win every single series, but that may not mean anything at the end. Like when it comes postseason time.
Yep. You just in Florida last year, you just got to get in and you can make some noise. Exactly. And then you look at the Tennessee, like they won all the series except Kentucky, and they didn't get there. And so it's such a hard sport to play. Nick, I mean, firsthand, playing collegiately on the D1 level. You can win every game in the regular season and be, a regional upset, and it's how the baseball goes.
Yep.
I've got one question. We've spent a lot of time just on A&M. I promise we won't do this, but Ryan Prager, because I think he's due to regress a little bit. Are you taking over under his finishing 2.95 ERA from last year?
I think over.
Yeah, I think like that 3.5 to like 3.75 range. I mean, it's so hard in college with metal bats to go sub 3. He had such a strong season last year. Like his expectations are so high. I mean, the guy gives up one hit and people are like, "What the hell?" And
yeah.
It's not fair to him to have that pressure, but to the same token, like you're the ace, you're expected to, succeed. But hopefully
that is the new world of college baseball, though. I mean, we saw anybody having hype. Paul Skeens kind of set that marker. You had Chase Dolander that they did it. Hagen Smith last year. Just you can't make a single mistake.
Brett Lauder. Yeah, I mean, there's guys that recently have shown they can do it, and that's who you're being stacked up against.
Yep.
And scouting reports are so good now too, where it's like he relied like, what was he, like 38% changeups last year? Like people will start sitting on that. So it's just one of those things. Like I obviously, and this is kind of in the background, I wouldn't be surprised if Miles Patton is their ace come like tournament time. Like people who obviously follow the sport as closely as us know how fun he was to bet on Fridays for Long Beach. It was like unders. It was unders and their money line. So like that's another huge name to look out for. If he's their Sunday guy. Whew.
Yeah. Curious to see how he performs now that he has some bats behind him.
Yeah.
Give some run support as well. All right, Q, Virginia. This is my pick to win the ACC. I think they're a lock to get to Omaha, and I even have money on them to win it all. So tell me why I'm right.
So I think Ryan O'Connor is one of the best coaches. I mean, he won a national title with a team that shouldn't have in 2015. Kind of like Matt said, he reminds me of Florida. Like they just always find a way to get to Omaha. They know how to play small ball, which in this day and age, it's kind of the long ball, but they have both this year, and that's what's extremely scary. Their lineup is absolutely stacked with preseason All-Americans. And then you look at the starting rotation, right? Like they don't have a Paul Skeens. They don't have a Ryan Prager necessarily, but Evan Blanco was one of the most consistent pitchers at throwing 6+ innings last year in the country. That guy just knows how to game. I mean, Matt, we saw him. He pitched, it was 2-1 in Omaha on the biggest stage, and he was throwing great. He just didn't have the run support. Jay Woolfolk, right? Like their intermittent closer setup, like he kind of did it all last year. He came out and threw 6 2/3 in the super regionals and looked like a true starter. He's better than that ERA shows for last season. And then Bryson Moore, coming in, like they have guys that they're not going to be aces per se, but they're always going to keep Virginia in games. They know how to pitch, and they're going to have run support. Like this is this team to me is so stacked. And then Brian O'Connor to come out first day of practice and say, this is the best team that I've had in 8 to 9 years. When you look at some of those Omaha teams, that's scary because he knows how to win, and he knows how to win in Omaha.
Yep. All right. LSU Tigers. This is one that I wrote up. A lot of hype around Cade Anderson. I trust Lou. He was the first one to put me on LSU probably about a month and a half ago. He reached out, just said, I think LSU is going to be really good. So I took them 18-1. That line finally opened, and I think it was 13 or 14, really across all the books. So I've got a good number there. I still like it in double digits, but you may wait too, because I think LSU is a team that could drop a couple series and then you get a higher rate of return on those odds with them, kind of buy low, sell high type thing. Then maybe getting a little too low. But LSU, Jay Johnson, I know Q, and he makes a really good point. I value his opinion a lot. Can Jay Johnson do it without the elite, big profile names? Paul Skeens, Dylan Crease, Trey, blah, blah, blah. Jared Jones, he's all you got now that's like of returning from that team that won it all 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Can he do it now? We'll see.
That's
my biggest question mark for LSU.
This is Nick's Georgia narrative. Like on paper, their talent jumps out, but is it going to show up? That's the difference. And I think Nick, the Georgia comparison, like the ceiling is so high with this team, Cade Anderson, Chase Shores. So, Nick, I don't want to steal your thunder, but that's just how I look at it from a long story short perspective.
Yeah, I don't think this team should be ranked preseason number 3. I don't know, LSU fan base, don't come at me. I'm not saying they can't end there by the end of the season. This team is just pieced from, there's players coming in from all over the country that's just being pieced together. You're relying on Chase Shores to be an ace. Now, he's going to be a top, next year, he will be a top probably 5 pick if he stays healthy. But he has to stay healthy. He hasn't proven that. This guy is super talented. He's an arm that everybody wanted, 95 plus off the bump. He's very Skeens-ish. He's a big dude, and he's extremely good. But can he stay healthy? And then you talk about Luis Hernandez from a small school. Daniel Dickinson, yes, he played for Team USA, but still, those stats are from small schools. It's one of those things. It's so hard, and people don't understand the difference between some of these smaller Power Fives, or not Power Five, but Group of 5 conferences, and you jump straight into an SEC schedule. It's not easy. Some people have success. It happens, but it's rare. There's no way they brought in all this talent and 90% of them aren't going to hit. You hope 50% of them are, and you piece it together from there.
Well said.
And LSU, after looking at their schedule, you may backtrack on what I said earlier. Now may be the best number you get because they don't face a top 10 SEC team until late in the season. But they finished the season Tennessee, at A&M, Arkansas, at South Carolina. So the old Paul Maneri series, that should be fun to close out the year.
That beats their famine. You're going to live or die towards
the
end
of
the season.
You get Missouri, Oklahoma, Auburn, Texas to start the year in the SEC play. They may not lose the series until that Tennessee series. But just something to monitor. Keep an eye on the Tigers because I do think they can make a run if that talent molds together. And Noah, thank you. Yes, opening day 2 weeks away.
Yes, sir.
Will you be my Valentine? College baseball, we love you. All right, Tennessee Volunteers. Nikki knows a little bit about them. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement around this team, and it's basically because it's another rebuilding year, just like 2023 was for them. I talked about this show earlier this morning that it reminds me a lot of that team because everybody knows about the Tennessee team in 22. It was the most talented team possibly ever assembled, in college baseball. That team was the most dominant, and then they lose everybody. So everybody thought, okay, 23 is going to be a rebuilding year. They started off slow, and then about halfway through the year, they just kicked into gear, made it to Omaha, obviously ran into Paul Skeens, doesn't work. So that was kind of a struggle. But that's why this reminds me of that. You come off a national championship, you lose Christian Moore, you lose Blake Burke, Billy Amick, Dylan Dreiling, Kavaris Tears, that offense got decimated. But I do trust Tony Vitello. There's nothing to show that this team is going to take a big drop because they haven't. And it's not just him. It's Josh Elander, Obviously, Frank Anderson has been longest tenured, has been the pitching coach in college baseball for a long time. And he talks about how excited he is for this pitching staff. And I trust him because he's not one to mince words at all. Like, he will tell you how it is. So I think a lot of this is going to come down to how that pitching staff performs. Like, it's everybody's question. Like, Liam Doyle, been around the SEC, he's fared okay. He hasn't had a ton of offense behind him in Ole Miss the last couple of years, but he is kind of like a bulldog on the mound that Vitello loves. Frank Anderson, he's become like Frank Anderson's favorite player, apparently. Like, he's just one of those type of guys. Nate Snead has a lot to prove because he's now not being forced, but they want him to be a starter. He started one game last year, but he's mostly a bullpen piece. And then the big piece is going to be Sunday. Brandon Arvidsson, who is a JUCO guy from San Jac. If you know college baseball, if you know JUCO, that team's always good. He was, I think, the number 2 JUCO pitcher in the country. So big arm coming in. It's between him and then a freshman, Tegan Coons, who was the number 122 draft prospect last year out of high school, but got drafted, decided to sign with Tennessee anyways. So I think there's going to be a learning curve for Tennessee. The back half of the bullpen, I'm not worried about at all. It's one of those things, it's another one where it's like fireball after fireball, it's going to come in. So it's going to be how they mix and match the front, this starting rotation. But the offense should keep them afloat in these games, especially early on. Until you get an SEC play, this offense is stacked again. They're going to put up a ton of runs. I don't think that's going to be an issue. So it really does come down to kind of that starting rotation for me. And if they piece it together, they have another good shot at making a run.
Q, you buying Tennessee this year?
They're a team that I'm still scouting. This is one where you're not putting away necessarily, because I think Nick hit it on the head. Offensively, they have no issues. It's going to be the starters. The bullpen will be fine. I'm curious to see who's going to be the 2025 Kirby Connell. And then there's a name Nick did mention, but I'm curious to see, how does AJ Russell, does he stay on track to kind of have that mid-SEC schedule return? And then if he does return, is he able to find his groove early on or in enough time to kind of really push this team into the playoffs? If he can stay on track and Liam Doyle, Nate Snead, and Arvidsson can just kind of make their way through the SEC, even pedestrian, you're going to lose a series or two in SEC. That's just how it is. Yeah. But if you can kind of stay afloat, keep confidence there, we trust this team, and then you can get him back and really have him as a dominant piece, because we know the talent's there. We saw it. It's just a question of how does he come back, how does he respond, and how does he, fit in. That makes them extremely dangerous. The talent's there pitching-wise. It's just got to perform. Liam Doyle, it's consistency with him. Nate Snead, just stretching him out. It's growing pains, I think. But they're in a position where the offense is going to take a lot of that pressure off for those guys. So Tennessee's a team I'm definitely keeping on the back burner and keeping a close eye on.
I don't know if they make it to Omaha. I don't think there's any value betting them plus 120 to make it to Omaha, plus 800 to win the College World Series. Maybe 10 or 11 to 1, but shop around, folks. Arkansas, know a little bit about them. Talked to Mason Choate last night, who covers them exclusively, and Gabe Gackle, just really surprising that he was a bullpen guy last year. You see the 2.32 ERA. He was a true freshman doing that in the SEC. Really good piece, really behind Hagen Smith there near the end of the season, is just a trusted arm out of that bullpen. We know Matt Hobbs is always going to have a great pitching staff for Arkansas. That's not really been the problem. We beefed it up even more having Zach Root, who's going to be our day 2 starter, followed by probably Landon Beetleshees or Gage Wood is the Sunday starter. So no real issues there. Love the pitching staff. We've got talent for days. You've got guys, Hunter Dietz, who barely played. He was coming off Tommy John's. We've got another transfer, Aiden Jimenez out of Oregon State, coming off Tommy John's. Just made an absolute amazing recovery. We didn't think he was going to be available till later on in the season. He is available now. But the bats, that's what killed us last year and kept us from going to Omaha. Kendall Diggs looks a lot better coming off that shoulder injury. Behiva Aloy is finally catching up to his pace and the hype that he had coming into the 2024 season. Brent Iredale, the Aussie, coming over from a community college, had an outstanding almost 1,600 OPS, 25 home runs. That's what Arkansas lacked last year, was that big-time hitter that can step up and get a hit. And he may not even be a guy you see in the third or fourth slot. You've got Charles Davelin, another transfer that's going to be really good. So I'm curious to see, and then didn't even talk about sophomore catcher Ryder Helfrich, who led the league in home runs in Cape Cod. So I think there's a lot of hype around this lineup in particular. Van Horn has said that he wants to be able to mix in small ball, but also be able to hit it over your head. And I think that ability has been what has ailed Arkansas really for the last 2 years. We just haven't had the bats. Pitching staff's great, but they can't score runs. So there's my spill.
Yeah, it's we're not worried about the staff. It's the offense. I do think they're going to be better offensively than they're great. I think Dave Van Horn actually did a really good job of bringing in actual impact hitters for all what you can tell when it's the portal. Again, like Nick said, they got to click, and that's the risk you take. But it's a game of baseball, and if they can solidify the hitting in terms of more consistency, they're a dangerous team.
All right, rolling on North Carolina. This was written up by Toddy, who's not here. Q, you want to take over North Carolina? I said on Jeff's show, I think even losing Jake Knapp before the season last year, North Carolina and Scott Forbes continued to figure out ways to get to Omaha, ultimately not finishing out the season like they wanted. But, I mean, North Carolina seems like a really dangerous team.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a guy like Vance Honeycutt, like that's impact, all a decade center fielder that people are going to continue to talk about. But they reloaded. They got a couple really good transfers. Tyson Bass, D3 kid, is just absolutely tore up fall camp. I have another kid from Liberty that was giving, great at bats throughout the season. Like offensively, I think they'll be able to hang. Pitching staff, if they can stay healthy, it's probably the best in the country. In my opinion, they have at least 2 number ones and a strong number 2 in Aiden Hall. But Fulger Boaz was lights out until his injury. Jason DeCaro just came out of nowhere, 17-year-old phenom towards the end, and really carried that team to Omaha. When you look at them, I mean, they have, bullpen depth. They have a great coach, a great line, offensive lineup. Like, as long as they can stay healthy, they're an extremely dangerous team. If they get to the injury bug, I think it's going to be tough against the ACC this year.
Yeah, ACC absolutely loaded. You've got so many good teams at the top, and then you've got teams like Louisville that I think could make a lot of noise. Nick, I know you're higher on Oregon State than I am. I'll let you take this one. What do you make of the Beavers this year?
This is going to be close to kind of the same breakdown as Tennessee. It's what can the starting pitching staff bring you? Because they're basically Nelson. Don't even know how to pronounce it. Keljo is what I'm going to go with this season. He's kind of like Snead for Tennessee, where he was a bullpen piece last year, great out of the bullpen, like extremely high velo, great, and now they want him to be a starter. Eric Segura threw a lot last season. He needs to improve, but this offense is going to be there again for them. I mean, they bring back, I believe, 6 starters from that offense. Everybody knows Turley, and then they're getting a Trent Caraway back. If anybody saw him miss like 44, 45 games last season, dude's a monster. And that was his freshman year. I think he's going to be one of those sneaky players that nobody's talking about just because it's his sophomore year and he didn't play a whole lot his freshman year just because of injuries. But he was their starting third baseman for a team that was loaded offensively in talent. So I'm kind of high on them. And then also their schedule helps them a lot. I kind of mentioned this on Jeff's show this morning, where they're going to end up hosting a regional out there on the West Coast. I think it's them, and I think Oregon hosts because I think we all had Oregon winning the Big Ten, I believe, and then maybe Santa Barbara, but that depends on what Santa Barbara does. But then there's going to be at least 2 West Coast teams. I think Oregon State is one of them. And you look at their schedule; they're playing 3 of those preseason tournaments. They're in Arizona week 1, I believe. They're in Frisco week 2, and then down in Houston week 3, I believe, at the Shriners. So there is a ton of upside on this schedule. Like, they were able to schedule whoever they want. So they play Oregon, they play Nebraska, they're playing UCSB, they're playing Irvine, and those are weekend series. So their schedule is extremely tough technically for an independent team that doesn't have a conference. So as long as they don't just like show up awful and like let down series. This is going to be this team will have an RPI in the top 10. So they should be hosting, puts them in a good spot. Obviously, tons of experience on the coaching staff too. So it's hard not to trust them. Until I see differently, I think this is a team that has at least, I like the path more than I like the roster here, is kind of what I'm trying to say. But I think the roster ends up catching up and they're going to score runs out there on the West Coast.
I wouldn't be surprised if they're a 50-win team, but I don't think they make it out of a regional because of that lack of play. I mean, you say that they may finish in the top in the RPI. Playing Long Beach, Hawaii, Oregon, Cal State Northridge, UC Irvine, Cal State Fullerton, Cal Poly. Like, I don't know. If you beat up on Big West, I don't know. I'm just not buying them. But that's fine. That's why we're doing this. Trying to extract some value for you guys.
Xavier, Indiana, Houston, Virginia, Oklahoma, Baylor.
But
Auburn,
those are one
Ohio
game
State,
series, and I don't know if they
San Diego is
win
3. You don't? See, I think they do. I think they had outside, like, just because they're an older team. Nebraska's a good RPI series. UC Irvine's a great RPI series.
Well, the good news is Friday,
Gonzaga,
February
Oregon.
1st, a week after first pitch, you get Virginia. We'll see.
We will. That'll be a good one. That's gonna be much.
Yeah, that'd be a really good game.
Stupid that freaking Flow baseball subscription I have to buy for a month, and then don't forget to delete it.
Yeah, cancel it. Georgia Bulldogs, I kind of talked about them earlier. I get why a lot of people are high on them. Their pitching staff returned Colton Smith, Leighton Finley. They're decent arms. You look at the ERA, they're not great, but they bring in JT Quinn from Ole Miss and his abysmal 9 ERA. I'm sure he improves, but when you bring back guys, and I may say this a lot on this show, but yeah, it's good to bring back guys. It's better to bring back guys that were good last year, but that being said, you've got to assume that they're going to improve. Slade offered Colby Branch both at 17 home runs. That's good. That's not going to replace Charlie Condon, though. There's still a lot of holes in this lineup, in my opinion. Georgia is a team that could get frisky enough and figure out a way to get to Omaha. I don't know if the pitching staff can win if it comes down to them.
Yeah, if you watched a lot of their games last year, they were in some spots where there were some games they should have lost, but the score ended up, siding on their side because of the name you mentioned, Charlie Condon. They weren't an overly great defensive team. They got rocked. Kennesaw State, I think, put up like 15 runs on them in a game. They were very hittable to your point about the pitching being decent. And then he just bailed them out of so many opportunities, bad spots, impact spots. He's not there. So, who's going to be that guy to step up and even fill one of his 2 shoes? They obviously reloaded. Devin Obie is a great pickup for them. They've returned, quite a few bats from their lineup. But again, that pitching staff, yeah, they go get a flashy name, Colton Smith, but is he elite? I don't know. I don't think he's a number 1. I think he's a solid Saturday guy. To be a Friday guy, I'm not sure. Same with Leighton Finley, right? You bring him back. He had some moments last year where he looked good. Not a Friday guy. He's a Saturday, Sunday guy. So when you look at this, and I guess you can compare this to a UVA, right? They're good pitchers. The thing, though, I think that separates them is UVA knows how to win. They know how to play small ball, and they didn't really have a guy that constantly had to bail them out in bad spots. Georgia had those problems last year that got covered up by the Band-Aid named Charlie Condon, and he's not there. It's good for baseball when Georgia's good. They haven't been to Omaha since, I think, 2008 or 2009 when Gordon Beckham was the namesake there. But I don't know if they're going to get there this year. I just think pitching is going to let them down.
All right, Nick, Florida State. They both the top pitcher in the country, Jamie Arnold. I think if we played the same game with Prager, under, over 2.98 ERA for the season finish for Jamie Arnold, I'm going under. Agreed. I love the kid. After that, I don't know. I was high on Evan Chris in Jacksonville last year. He absolutely blew up. So I don't know what to make after Arnold. This may be very similar to last year's Arkansas team where, yeah, you can trust the win on Friday night, but you're going to lay probably minus 300 on the money line, but after that, you can bet against them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at one of the problems, like look at that power number up there. That's by far the lowest we've seen so far on this list. Everybody will know those impact hitters, those 3 guys right there that I listed. Those are the names coming back, and that's it. That's the problem. Those are the only guys coming back. James Tibbs is a huge loss. Cam Smith is a massive loss. So this offense is going to really struggle. I'm kind of worried about this offense. Everybody's kind of praising how good their defense is going to be. Yes, their defense will be great, especially up the middle. Between catcher, shortstop, second, and center is going to be fantastic, possibly the best in the country. But this day in college baseball, you can't win with defense. Like, that's not how the game is won. So I'm very worried about this team because you mentioned that's just on the offensive side. And then you mentioned, Jamie Arnold probably is going to be favored on most Fridays. But how many times are we going to say, like, how could we could see them getting beat 2-1 or like in a 3-2 ball game on Friday nights if they come up against like anybody you mentioned, like North Carolina, good pitching staff, Virginia, good pitching staff, like Wake, any of those teams. It's going to be tough. Like, it's going to be tough sledding. Like, they're not going to bail out the pitching staff like they did last year. And that's such a worry when you're already worried about the pitching staff that Cam Leiter's out, at least to start the season. Me personally,
reports.
I don't think he throws it all this year. And that's what I'm hearing. He's not throwing yet. He's barely picked up in baseball, still doing rehab stuff. I think he's more of one of those guys where he knows he's going to be a top 15, top 20 pick. That's a done deal. I don't think that matters if he pitches or not. That's kind of done, just talent-wise. So I think it could depend on where they're at, but I don't know if he pitches. And then, you mentioned Joey Vellini. Not a great arm to get from, like, that was not a great portal pickup, and he's supposed to be their Saturday guy. Like, that kind of I don't know. Didn't see how this team was preseason ranked 9th outside of just going off of what they did last year.
Yeah, I don't understand the hype. Like, there's got to be something we're missing. If you go into a press conference and you say we're going to be really good defensively to start it out, that's very concerning to me. I mean, Tibbs, right? We just talked about Condon and the number 8 Georgia.
Yeah,
James Tibbs was essentially Charlie Condon for
far and away the ACC Player of the Year. Like, it wasn't close.
They should have. I mean, they were on the ropes against UConn in the Super Regional against UConn, but they should have not made Omaha if it wasn't for James Tibbs III. Like, you take him off that team, they don't make Omaha last year. Same thing, Cam Smith, Jaime Farrar, like, they have no offense. And like you said, Jamie Arnold is going to be a pitcher where you're looking at him and he might have, a 7-7 record or something like that, great ERA, and you're like, holy crap, like, this guy sucks. But then you look at the numbers, 3-2 game, 2-1, 4-3, and you're like, oh, well, it's not on him. He kept them in the game 7 innings, and I think that's what you're going to see. They're not going to compete with Wake offensively, Duke, Clemson. Like, these teams are just going to battle
Virginia offensively.
Like, they can't. It's not going to work for them.
All right, let's go across the state of Florida and discuss the Gators, Q.
Yeah.
Not very good ratings. Tell me why they're wrong.
They were one of the best defensive teams in baseball last year, so I'm just a little perplexed in the C-. I mean, I think you could probably give every team a B to a B+, and nobody would really second guess it. But when you start putting a team in the C's that was so good last year, it's just kind of tough. They got better defensively. They got faster. They have a true center fielder, like All-American style in Kyle Jones. Hayden Yost came back from the ACL. He was tearing it up off the bench until he blew his knee out. They get Ty Evans back, like, great right fielder. Bobby Bozer, true third baseman. Colby Shelton was one of the best shortstops last year defensively. I think they're in a really good bounce back spot. When you look at the team, they struggled. They figured out a way to grind out a semifinalist, essentially, finish. They have a coach that knows how to win. He's top 5 in the game, top 3 probably. The pitching staff is the question mark here, but there's a ton of talent. We saw Pierce Capala come back last year, pitch really well in Omaha. Peterson started putting things together towards the end of the season until they ran into Clemson. And I think just the pressure of being in a rowdy environment kind of got to him. They changed his motion. He's got a lot less mechanics east and west. He's more north and south now. And they said it's like doubled his consistency around the zone. And a couple guys that aren't on this, like Alex Philpott gained 6 miles an hour on his fastball coming back from a broken hand. Like, that's unheard of at this level to go 6 miles an hour higher. He's throwing lights out. McNeely was another guy, just a true freshman, a lot of innings. Like, their depth this year compared to last year where they relied on Jamison Fisher and Brandon Neely, that's not a problem this year. They just brought back Michael Byrne as a student coach, like one of the greatest pitchers in Florida history out of the bullpen. They know how to win. And I think offensively, you're going to see bounce backs from Luke Heyman, Cade Curlin, Colby Shelton. Like, when you hit 20 home runs, you bat 256, and that's a down year. That's pretty scary. So I think you buy on Florida now, because I think I got it like 22-1. And I think they're only going to get worse in terms of a number for you. I think this team is going to be really good and really dangerous if the pitching can click.
All right, let's go back to the ACC here. Another top-heavy ACC team in Duke Blue Devils. Andrew Healy, Kyle Johnson, James Talent. These are all guys that we saw last year. Pretty good ERAs there at the top. The question mark for me is going to be hitting. Do they have the lineup? Q, you wrote them up.
Yeah, I'll keep it shorter than Florida. Like, they're a good overall solid team. They're not elite by any means. They're going to give ACC teams good weekends. Like, when they play Virginia away, Clemson, those guys, like, they're going to be a 3-game series, and it's going to be good baseball to watch. The hitting is the concern. They did lose a lot of their offensive power last year. Obi transferring, the catcher Stone, like, he's gone. I mean, it's who's going to step up offensively. The pitching staff, Healy was in and out with injuries last year. Kyle Johnson, a good two-way player, not a lead on the mound, not terrible. James Tyon, same thing. Like, they're going to be okay. They're going to stay in games. It's just if the offense can keep them in games.
Biggest loss, probably Jonathan Santucci, not having him.
I was going to say that. Yeah, he was, impact guy for, the last 3 years.
Up a lot.
Too, towards the end when they didn't really have him due to the injuries. So,
all right, the Oregon Ducks. This is a now Big Ten team in baseball. We saw their emphatic run in college football. I think they could have a lot of the same success in baseball here. Traveling for football, a lot different than baseball. It's got to be costing the school millions of dollars to do this. But throw that out the window. I think they've got an ace in Grayson Grinsell that's going to be really good. The bats, that's kind of the question mark for me. Oregon, we kind of joked the last couple of years, they've had good teams, but like, they don't really have a guy that's going out and getting you 25 home runs. And then they didn't have a pitching staff where the guys had like low 3 ERAs. But I just think Oregon is in a good spot in a weak Big Ten where they'll be able to make some noise this year. So it's definitely a team to keep an eye out on. 400 or plus 400 to make the College World Series. I think that may be worth a nibble. They finished in the Supers last year. This team always is consistently around the 40-win mark, and I think they're going to be that or better this year, depending on how this pitching staff rounds out the rotation.
Yeah,
But,
I'm with you.
There you go.
I was just going to say, I'm with you there. Are you?
Nick, you said you like Oregon this year. I agree. Like, they're in a weak conference baseball-wise. And they have more power than they've had the past few years. Like,
that's where I was going.
It's actually better. They have guys that have close to 20 home runs. They played such small ball, against Oral Roberts and the teams that were good the last couple of years. There's been huge buy-in from not only the fan base, but the school itself, bringing back baseball 5-6 years ago, whatever it was. Like, they're all in on this. I think they're in a perfect spot to come in and dominate the Big Ten on the diamond. And again, I think Nick and I, we can agree their offense is better than it has been the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think Grayson Grinsell immediately steps in as probably a pitcher of the year in the Big Ten.
Yes.
After Brett Sears gone in Nebraska, who won it last year. And then offensively, I think what you look at, this is by far the best offense in the Big Ten. Like, maybe Maryland can kind of recapture some stuff from a couple years ago. Indiana is a huge question mark. Like, there's talent there. They've kind of brought in some guys, but that pitching staff is probably going to be better in their offense. And then Michigan's kind of down. Like, there's just not an offense that scares me in the Big Ten outside of I think Oregon has the best one, especially when it comes to power. Like Q said, like, this team's going to put up a ton of runs. This is people are going to think this is a West Coast team. They will not be playing baseball like a West Coast team. The ball actually flies there, surprisingly, in Oregon. So this is a team I'm very high on. And like I mentioned earlier in the Oregon State breakdown, they're going to host just because they're going to win the Big Ten. They'll RPI will be good. They're going like the NCAA will not once again do a one West Coast host. So I think we'll get at least 2, maybe 3. So I really trust Oregon to be one of those.
Yeah, I think they win the Big Ten. I just whenever they get
They're
faced
going
up,
to win a title, but they're going to be dangerous.
yeah, a solid team. If they have to play
They'll
a
host
super
the
regional
Super.
against the ACC or SEC, I just think it's going to be a big step up in competition.
Yeah, it definitely depends on how much they roll through the Big Ten. Like if they can get a top 8, and they host one of those ACC teams and make
they'll
them
be
fly
dangerous.
across the country, then that's kind of where they're dangerous. If they kind of
Or-
tippy toe through the Big Ten or an SEC team, like one of those back half SEC teams, and go all the way up to Oregon, then I think that plus, what'd you say it was, plus 400?
Yeah,
It's not
make
terrible
eligible
value.
too.
That's not terrible
That's
value.
great.
Yeah, I
value.
can see them getting like a Vanderbilt or Mississippi State, depending on how they do. I mean, they've been matched up against Vanderbilt in the past. I think they could beat them, but not one of the big boys.
Yeah, I agree.
NC State, another team that I'm higher on probably than most. Pitching staff, you look at those numbers for Dom Britton, who I feel like has been on this team since the COVID year when they were wrong. But I mean, NC State, I don't know. They're always there. I feel like being ranked preseason 13th is probably a favor, just based on the history of their program. But again, is it going to surprise you if they make it back to Omaha? Probably not.
It's such an ugly lineup, but
it is
with this Wolfpack team. I don't have an opinion because I can't ever get a read on them. So Nick, I'll deflect to you.
Yeah, they're just a team I'm a little bit down on. I think they're ahead of a couple ACC teams that they shouldn't be. Like you said, I don't trust this lineup. The pitching staff, like you look who they brought back, it's not great. I think they are getting a lot just because they've been so they haven't been great, but they've been so consistent over the last 3 years. I think they are kind of getting some feed off that, but they just I don't think people understand how important Kozart was the last 2 years of that team.
And Makarevich, he came alive at the end of the season.
At the end, So having a leader like that at catcher and having to replace that is extremely tough, especially one who possibly was the best catcher in the country last year. So I don't know. I'm not high on this team. I think it's probably somewhere in the 6 to 9 range in the ACC. I don't think they should be ranked 13th preseason. I'd probably have them around 20th to 30th.
All right. We talked about Wake Forest earlier. Q, you did the write-up on them. Tell me why you're excited about this Wake Forest lineup.
Yeah, so like last year, right? They were the number 1 team preseason. A lot of pressure after losing guys like Louder. I'm drawing a blank on their Saturday guy who was just ultra elite as well. Kind of got overshadowed by Rhett. And they just didn't pan out. You could tell a lot of frustration. The bats just couldn't get it going. But, man, their lineup this year is stacked. I mean, Merrick Houston, probably the best shortstop in baseball right now preseason. Jack Winay's coming back, and then Ethan Conrad and Cade Lewis are 2 incredible portal hauls that they picked up. Their lineup at 1 through 9 is just so consistent, and they still have some power there in a very hitter-friendly ballpark. The talent, what makes me believe in this is similar to Tennessee. Frank Anderson's there, right? And you can always trust that he's going to get the best out of his pitchers. I think the same thing at Wake Forest. Matt Dallas coming from Tennessee, a lot of hype into him. Didn't throw much, but you could see the talent. Logan Lunsford was on that horrible Missouri team that I don't like to talk about, but he showed flashes. He had some really dominant starts that people may have overlooked throughout the season. And then Duncan Marston is coming in, a lot of hype. The pitching lab has shown success. And I think with the lineup being so consistent this year heading into the season is what we project. It's going to take a lot of pressure off these guys because they're able to go into those 9-8 games and really feel like, hey, we still have a shot if we go down 2 or 3 runs, where last year, man, they went down 3 runs. You're like, this is it. I mean, they just don't have anybody to will them back. And I look at this team, and it's a good reflection for them. We got a high rank last year. We didn't show up. Now we need to reset, refocus, and get back to Omaha. And I think they could be a dangerous team to do it.
Yeah, I think Logan Lunsford a name to keep an eye on. If there was a most improved player, he's probably going to be it, especially coming in with a near 7 ERA. But I've heard that he's looked really good in camp. Sean Sullivan was the name you were looking for.
Sean Sullivan,
'Cause
yeah.
that
I thought it
rotation
Hartle.
was deadly with Louder,
Hartle was
Hartle,
their
and
Sunday guide. He kind of fell off last year.
yeah.
I think
And Josh Hartle was the ace last year and just
Mm.
didn't live up to the, or I guess Chase Burns was the ace,
Yeah.
but Hartle came back as the premier arm. Clemson Tigers, Nick. The most baseball name, Cam Canarella. Drafted to our fantasy NCAA Insiders team. Shout out Noah B.
Call him, say, hey, Willie, too, last year.
Tell me about the Tigers.
Yeah, as Q knows, we talked about this a couple weeks ago on Jeff's show. I'm extremely high on Clemson this year. I think this team has a chance to win ACC. I probably have them as the second best team behind Virginia. I think there's a decent gap there, but that's also like you don't know if Virginia is going to stay fully healthy. But Clemson, like you look at this team and everything they brought back offensively, and then who they brought in. Luke Gaffney from Purdue, freshman player of the year in the Big Ten. Colin Priest from Michigan was probably the second best freshman in the Big Ten last year, bringing in power that they didn't quite have last year. And the guys who did have power last year for them struck out a ton. Like you look at Will Taylor, I think it was his name, the football player, struck out a lot, but had some power. I think this is going to be a much more consistent lineup. And then Cam Canarella obviously is going to do Cam Canarella things. Like I think those numbers like what he has even done the last 2 years are probably going to improve even more. I mean, he played last year with a torn labrum for 3/4 of the season. And a lot of people think, oh, well, it just affects your throwing. But no, like that, I'm sure it hurt every time he took a swing and still came out with those numbers. It also stopped him from running as much. So I think he probably swipes 25, 30 bags this year as well. And then you look at the pitching staff. Like Aiden Knack could be the best arm in the ACC.
Super underrated.
Yes, extremely underrated. Like he as a freshman last year, he was like lock. He was one of those, like I remember talking about on the podcast I had last year where it was like he was throwing Saturdays, sometimes Sundays for them. So I was always hope Clemson would lose on a Friday so the number would inflate for when he would throw the next day. Like he was just one of those guys that is so good. And if it weren't for Jamie Arnold, he's probably the best pitcher, like I said, in this conference. Outside of that, I mean, they have just guys with like Michael Gillen to bring in, who was a bullpen guy, Seton Hall, but is like you're gonna be like arm talent is through the roof. This guy's gonna hit 98. He's been a bullpen guy, but they expect him to be a starter. Apparently, he has been killing it for them. And then Ethan Darden is another name like who we've handicapped before. Is like it's just experience on the mound. This is one of those few teams where I don't think there's very many question marks in the starting rotation, and it's more on the back end of the bullpen. But I think this offense can kind of carry them enough where the back end of the bullpen, where their question marks aren't going to shouldn't be in a whole lot of close games towards the end, hopefully, to kind of lose those. Because I trust, like I said, trust the weekend rotation and trust this offense to put up a ton of runs.
That's the biggest thing for me. I think Aiden Knack is like a true ace for Clemson this year, and that could be a difference maker. They were in a lot of those games too, though, where the back end bullpen fell apart and they had to get in the shootouts. But
yeah, absolutely.
We'll see. Vanderbilt, another one that I'm going to say is this is just like a placeholder ranking based on what you've done in the past. I'm not buying Vandy. I think Tim Corbin's a hell of a coach, but he may not be buying into this NIL stuff, the transfer portal. I find it very hard to believe that they're going to consistently get the type of talent that they had over the past decade in this new world of college baseball and just college athletics in general. So I'm selling Vandy. I wouldn't be surprised if they miss the postseason.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I wrote this one up. Pitching staff is going to be a Vandy pitching staff again. Like I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of issues. J.D. Thompson is going to be a stud. Ethan McElwain, we've seen Cody Bowder. So it's going to be very good on the pitching staff, weekend rotation side of things, just like Tim Corbin's teams always has been. Is he finally going to adopt like this new age, like power baseball? Like these aren't the old BB Corbett. Like when you think back to when Vandy was ruling things, because our pitching staff was so good, and teams with those BB Corbats and the dead balls couldn't score more than 4 runs against bad pitching. So of course they're not going to score against David Price and Leiter and those guys. So now you talk about this Vandy team. He got rid of his hitting coach and pitching coach, brought in a brand new pitching staff. or pitching coach, hitting coach, all that. And so is he going to finally adopt to this new wave? I think if he does, it's not going to be with. I don't see this roster as one of those rosters because he's put it together. This is more of a speed hitting, like speed pitching and defense roster. You look at those names like Vastine, I think RJ Austin. I think those numbers are going to take a huge leap. Like this is one of those guys who's going to be a dark horse for possible like SEC like top 5 player. He should be very good. I think everybody's surprised when they brought in Mike Mancini. Not that they brought him in, but I think everybody's surprised that that's who he chose.
Yeah.
I know Tennessee was in on him. LSU was in on him. I think Florida was another one that I wanted him to play like second, but I think they like Blake Sear went there instead. So it's one of those where it's like he chose. It was a weird decision by him, but I'm sure now he's gonna be their 3-hole. They need him to have an extremely big year. And we look at the offenses in this conference, like even the teams that were down, like Texas, is pitching staff's going to struggle, but they're going to put up a ton of runs. A&M, Tennessee, Q mentioned Florida. Arkansas pitching staff is better than Vandy's, even if their offenses are the same. LSU's offense, like Vandy, if they don't put up runs better than they have the last couple of years, it's going to be a struggle again, and that's just plain and simple with how college baseball is right now.
Moving along, Oklahoma State. Q's Florida Gators put them out. I was riding a big ticket on them. They just were really clicking on all cylinders. They lost a lot on their pitching staff, but they returned Nolan Schubart, who I think at 20-1 is worth a bet on the Golden Spikes. This kid's an absolute stud. I think his numbers get even better this year because that may be the only guy that they can lean on. Colin Brueggemann, he's going to be solid. Aiden Mayola is a guy that's been there. I have way too many question marks about this pitching staff. They strung it together last year. Sam Garcia and them guys stepped up, especially there at the back half of the season. I just don't know if Holiday's got another one in him to make a big run. But this pitching staff can, if they come alive and figure it out, they've got the lineup that can win games. Y'all doing anything on the Cowboys?
Yeah, I think we bet them all, right? Big 12.
No, I was the only one that didn't. That's what I was.
Oh, you in Arizona? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big 12, like it's. I think this year it's going to be a weak baseball conference. I think if you take Arizona or Oklahoma State, like you're sitting on a good ticket. Both are plus money, and then it's a pretty big drop off, especially with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. Matt said it perfectly. Like the pitching staff, Oklahoma State is a team, and they're always so good, and you can see the talent, but they lose games they shouldn't. And then when they get a postseason ball, they collapse. And that's what happened last year. And I think that's just kind of the brand of Oklahoma State baseball. Like the pitching staff, you're just asking for a lot to click, especially with an offense that is probably not going to be as good as last year's offense. I still think it's a good one. But anything outside of a conference ticket, I'm not very confident in. Like I would definitely avoid that. But yeah, Big 12 ticket, it's them or Arizona, and I think that's decent.
I'm curious to see how they handled Jason Jones. It was at Arkansas. He turned down $1 million to go to Arkansas, and then he transferred. He just never really panned out. Couldn't hit the ball like he did, and had so much potential. But I wouldn't be surprised if he has a really good year under that Holiday offense. Mississippi State. This is another team that I've heard a lot of people are high on. Nick, you mentioned it earlier on ECSI. I feel like they're always in that conversation of being good, but they're not great. Pitching staff, you get Carson Lagone. That was the kid from Louisville or Miami.
Yeah. Can't stay healthy though.
There's just so many question marks. You lose Urangelo Cinci, the ambidextrous pitcher that everybody loved. Pico Cone comes in, 3.38 ERA, looks good, but he didn't pitch a lot last year. Nick, tell me about the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think I'm higher on this team, I think, than at least the other 3 of you, I believe. I think this is one of those dark horses to be like a top 3 to 4 team in SEC. And I think it's because their floor is so high. I think this team's going to be good no matter what. I think they have a chance to be great, though. I don't think this team will be bad. Their roster is way too stacked. I actually trust their pitching staff, even after you mentioned losing Sinji and what was the other guy's name I mentioned? Cal Steven, who's been kind of their Friday night guy for the last couple of years. Pico Cone apparently has been getting praise about how he's been doing. Nobody thought he was going to be a Friday guy, and then had an extremely good fall, and now he's been bumped up, and they think he's getting that role and is ready to be an ace in the SEC. But mostly, I like this offense. I think is going to really surprise people. Like Hunter Hines is way too good for people not to be talking about. Like I think he's kind of I think his like down year last year, as I mentioned, like in the article, like look at those numbers, and that was a down year for him. Like I think this is a guy who should hit 285 to 310. He's gonna hit 20 plus. Like I don't see how he won't. Like I think this is a guy who can explode. Noah Sullivan was another guy that everybody wanted in the portal. A lot of people haven't heard of him, being from USC Upstate, but extremely good hitter, extremely polished, and people are talking like this could be like this is like a first round, second round bat. And to put that in the middle of the order is going to be really good. And this team's going to be so consistent offensively. Like there's talent kind of 1 through 9. Like outside of those two, nobody is going to stand out, but this is going to be one of those teams where it reminds me of kind of that Florida offense last year. Whereas like you had Cags and you had Colby Shelton, and then it was sort of like a bunch of guys who were like average to above average, but nobody was like bad or like extremely bad. I think that's kind of what this Mississippi State's team's going to be. So I think this team will surprise a lot of people. I know this seems to be possibly outside of Texas the most like polarizing team in our community this year, where it's like some people think they're either going to be, some people say horrible or they're going to be great. Like there's very few people in the middle. I think I lean more towards them being extremely good this year with the high floor they have.
And horrible in the SEC is like a 40 year, like let's be real.
Yeah, I meant horrible in the SEC as in they finished like I don't see them being like lower than probably like the 6th best team.
Yeah. All right, Texas Longhorns, welcome to the SEC. Biggest thing, Max Bellew, he's one of the biggest or shortest shots to win the Golden Spikes. I have so many questions about this pitching staff, and I sound like a broken record, but I feel like the bats are getting better everywhere, and the pitching is getting smaller. Like you either have to be elite or you're just another arm. And we've seen it with Texas over the years. They've always had that solidified ace. Now, not so much. They're going to have to rely on these transfers. Jared Spencer coming over from Indiana State. Nick, tell me about the Longhorns.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the top 3 or 4 offenses in the country. Like this team is going to it's going to remind you of maybe Virginia over the last few years, where it's like they're going to try to outscore everyone. There's going to be a lot of overs in these games because I do not trust this pitching staff. Jared Spencer, they're bringing in, is extremely, extremely talented. Like I'm sure a lot of people haven't seen him. Lanky guy, was a freshman All-American, had sort of a down year last year, like wasn't as good as his freshman year, but he's been a bullpen guy. And now all of a sudden you're throwing him into the pressure at Texas as a Friday guy in SEC. So if that's like your guy, I'm not high on this pitching staff. We've also seen Grayson Saunier for like pitch at Ole Miss. It wasn't tremendous. And we talk about how talented this Texas team is, but it's all on the offensive side. Like Jalen Flores, Max Bellew, Kinder Schussler. We know those names, and that's only naming a few of them. Like they have so many other guys that are extremely good. I think this is where I think Max Wiener is now the highest paid pitching coach in the country. I can't remember if he passed that Frank Anderson or not.
Yeah.
So this is going to be where, like, hey,
a lot of pressure.
Was A&M, was that year or two, was the year, what A&M, was that a fluke because of how talented you were on the mound, or are you that good of a pitching coach? Like he's young, extremely knowledgeable. He's great he uses analytics a lot. So let's see what he can do, because there's going to be a lot of pressure on his shoulders, because it's going to get annoying in Texas after you bring in Schloss. There's like immediately this program's going to want to win. They put a lot of money in the transfer portal, so their pressure is there. I think they will eventually be good. Like Schloss is good everywhere he goes. Like doesn't matter if it's TCU, A&M. Texas will be good, but I don't see them competing for an SEC this year. I don't see them competing for a College World Series, even berth this year, unless Max Wiener literally does like magic with this pitching staff. I just don't see it there. But this is going to be an over team that I'm going to love playing in SEC, because they're going to score a lot of runs and they're going to give up a lot of runs.
All right, DBU, the first appearance of a mid-major in the top 25 here with the Patriots, unless you want to count Oregon State, who's independent. We'll classify them as mid-major, I guess, for all intents and purposes. DBU been successful in the past. They can't seem to get to Omaha, no matter how good they are. And again, I said it to start the show. I feel like you have the top, and then there is a big gap between everybody else. And unfortunately, I feel like DBU just falls in that gap. They're going to have a pretty stacked lineup. It looks like they're not going to have that ace, but I just can't. Plus 500 to make the College World Series. I want no part of it. I don't think they do. And they're favored to win their conference. So that's probably rightfully so. Outside of that, if you want to lay the juice, minus 143 on them to win the Conference USA, sure. But that's a long time to sweat it out for laying money.
Yeah, so I actually like if you can find a book that doesn't limit you to like a $6.17 bet on the it's like I do think the 143 is worth laying because anybody is close in the conference they're in. So like if you have the extra money lying around, I think it's a pretty safe bet just based on their competition and their offense. Like they're the Dallas bombing unit. Like they're going to hit home runs time and time again. The pitching staff, like great pitching coach, love their head coach. Hellwanger will be okay. Andy Pettit's son, Luke Pettit, he pitched pretty well last year in limited innings. Like, I don't have any doubt that they're going to dominate their conference. I wouldn't lay to make the College World Series, but they're going to win a lot of games for you. Like, they're a team that you bet weekend to weekend and take that conference winning minus 143 line. But outside of that, just kind of stay away. But you could definitely win a lot of money and probably win back what you laid and what you're sitting on with that conference bet. Throughout the weekend with these guys.
Yeah, how old are we talking about Andy Pettit's son now?
Well, then you have the Clemens boys at Texas. Like,
yeah. Replacing Ryan Johnson's going to be massive. I mean, that guy he was so good for them. He was like Friday guy. And the problem here with Dallas Baptist, and like they're going to be great again. Like they're the best mid-major team in the country. I think again, like it's probably between them and Troy, like kind of how we base it. ECU's always up there, obviously, but I just think Dallas Baptist is above and beyond. I think this year, the problem is with that College World Series number and kind of what's ran into them in the last few years is it's honestly just location. It's geography. Yeah. Like being located in Dallas means, it means if you can, even if you host the regional, then your super is at either A&M or like a Texas or an Oklahoma State or an Arkansas or LSU. Like it just does not favor them at all. So I think that's kind of been their issues, and that's why the College World Series is a tough bet. But this program, like as good as they've been, even since I was in school, like they were in the conference with me when I was at Evansville, and they were extremely good back then, and they've been good ever since. So this is one of those teams that's just like East Carolina. It's like eventually they're going to break through. This will be an Omaha team at some point. They're just too good of a program. It's just tough for them, but I think they'll be extremely good.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth when you said they could be faced up against an Arkansas. They do. I wouldn't be surprised if they're a 2 or 3 seed in the Fayetteville Regional, or if they get to host. I don't think they're in the hosting picture, but
it'd be like 15, 16. It depends.
Definitely. I think you're going to get better odds at that point if you want to bet them to win the Fayetteville Regional. They're going to be higher than plus 500. So, and you don't have to take them as far.
Yeah, their RPI is going to come down to those midweeks. Like they play Texas a couple times, A&M a couple times, Oklahoma twice, Oklahoma State twice,
and they win those games. They'll win them outright.
That's where this is going to be one of those seasons for them. It's like they win them a lot because they have to take it more seriously because the Conference USA this year is even farther down. I think Western Kentucky's not as good, Kennesaw's not as good, Jacksonville State's not as good. So I think they're going to be one of those teams like I'm going to love. As if they are underdogs on like Tuesdays or Wednesdays, just because, like I said, that's where they're going to have to build their RPI up, and that's where they're going to have to get those wins if they want to host.
First game, Wednesday, February 26th, as far as midweeks go, at LSU. Give me DBU right now.
Yeah, don't sleep on them.
Yeah, that's where you want to bet them. All right, Arizona Wildcats. Interestingly enough, Q wrote them up, but Nick picked them to win the Big 12, so I'll let y'all divvy up who you want to talk about.
Yeah, I had deja vu writing them like last year, brand new pitching staff. Same thing this year. They panned out last year really well, exceeding expectations. Probably one of the best and most consistent starting 3 in college baseball last year. But
Jackson Kent, all reliable.
Yeah, but they just offensively, like they have some good pieces. They're not consistent. I think they're going to battle the same thing. I think to Nick's point we talked about earlier, like they're a safe Big 12 bet because I think the Big 12 is going to be down this year across the board, and it's Arizona or Oklahoma State to win. So like if you took them to win their conference at plus 175 or plus 200, if you got them early, like I think it's a good bet. But again, same as last year, like can the pitching staff do wonders like they did last year? It's just it's hard to tell. I would say I lean towards the yes. It's not a definitive just because it's hard to get three guys to click. It's so much easier to only have to have maybe a Sunday problem. But when you're trying to reload Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, it's a tall task. But McKinney, Kapala coming from Rutgers, like they're good pitchers. It's just can they pan out against a better competition, and time will tell.
Nick?
Yeah, I just picked them to win the Big 12 over Oklahoma State just because of the offense. I just think I trust the offense more than I trust Oklahoma State's offense. I think the two pitching staffs are probably going to be similar. It is scary, the thought of your Friday and Saturday guys that transfer from Baylor who wasn't very good, transfer from Rutgers who wasn't great either. That's kind of the scary part. And to be fair, like I picked them to win the Big 12. I wouldn't bet them to win the Big 12, especially at that number. I also wouldn't bet Oklahoma State to win the Big 12, to be fair. I think this is going to be kind of like how Big 12 football was, where it's like it's going to be so mushed up of teams that just aren't like fantastic that I wouldn't be shocked if like a Kansas State, who some people are high on, Kansas this year. So I just wouldn't bet it, but I trust them kind of the offense more than Oklahoma State's.
Yeah, I 100% think you're more profitable by betting more of the dark horse, like plus 400, plus 500 to win this conference.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to be an absolute toss-up. UC Santa Barbara, again, I talked about it earlier. Tyler Bremner is a true ace for this team. UC Santa Barbara just seems to continue to churn them out. They're going to win 40 to 50 games, but then probably lose in the regionals because they don't have guys that can hit. Isaac Ken, coming over from a community college, had good numbers at a CC, but outside of that, they don't have to do a whole lot throughout the regular season to win the Big West. But then you get up against guys that have also good pitching and guys that can hit. You're going home early. This is not a super regional, definitely not a College World Series team, in my opinion. As much as I want a dark horse to get there, plus 500 to make the College World Series should be more like plus 2,000. I just don't think they've got the horses in that lineup to do it.
Yeah, you mentioned the lineup and they couldn't score last year, and they lost 7 of those starters. And now, so they're replacing. You wrote it up like they're replacing them with a whole new lineup. And if there's a reason the 7
with guys that aren't very good,
there's a reason the guys they're replacing weren't playing ahead of those guys that they had to replace from last year. So, yeah, like Tyler Bremner, it's going to be a struggle. This is going to be one of those kind of like Jamie Arnold things where it's like, hey, look at the number on Fridays. But outside of that, it's going to be tough. Like I'm actually pretty high on Flora. Like from what I've seen, because I remember seeing him last year, he's a good arm, but he's not like great. Like could he have made jumps in the offseason? I don't follow UC Santa Barbara a whole lot in the offseason to kind of know and start seeing video. So it's kind of tough to tell, but I do think they're going to be one of the best teams. They're probably they'll be great in the Big West. Probably, I think it's them, Irvine, and then a huge gap to everyone else. So I think they'll be fine. They'll get comfortable. I don't think they won't be good enough to host the regional. I just think the RPI won't be there. So unless they win like 55 games or something, just go crazy. So I'm not high on this team, but I do think like in me being not high is saying they're still probably a top 30, top 40 team in the country. I just don't think they're a College World Series team. Now, would I be surprised with those 2 starters if they get to a suit? Like maybe those 2 guys throw lights out in the first 2 games of a regional, but can they win a super? I don't think so.
It's still a tall task to replace Matt Ager and Mike Gutierrez. Like they've had the 1-2 punch.
Yep.
They won 44 games last year, but can't get out of a regional.
And you could be a 2 seed at Oregon State or at Oregon or at A&M too, because the A&M is going to be one of the more Western teams. So yeah, it's going to be tough.
All right, going on to number 23, TCU. I've been high on Ben Abelt since I watched him carve up Arkansas's lineup 2 years ago in that Fayetteville Regional. 1.83 ERA last year. He is now going to be the guy. And Kirk Saarloos has a knack about him. He missed the postseason last year, but he's a good coach. He figures out ways to win. I think the plus 250 to make the College World Series odds are way too short. But again, they're playing in a Big 12 conference. It's down. I'm not going to be surprised if TCU screws around and wins 40 games and is in contention with everybody else in the Big 12. But until I see from a starting rotation, they got Tommy Lepore from Wichita, who was a good pickup. And then Caden Parker probably closes out that lineup. As far as the rotation goes, they still lost a lot on offense, and an offense that wasn't very good last year. Started off really hot in the season. I feel like they miraculously won every single game that they were in when they probably should have lost. But I probably selling TCU at this point. I don't think they're an Omaha team for sure. Maybe in contention to win the Big 12 just because it's down.
Yeah, same thing. You said they lost too much. Like when you look at the offense, Bowen and Silva is really all they have, and they're hit or miss, to say the least. And then, Abel coming in as, he struggled at times last year. He got in some spots where couldn't find the strike zone at times. And, Cole Klecker, the guy that crushed Arkansas's dreams, like he sucked last year. There's no way to say that any lighter. I haven't, from what I've read, like I haven't heard that he's putting on a show by any means. Like they're really banking on him to come back and give him some consistency and some leadership from his veteran standpoint. And I just don't think it's there. I don't even think, you say a dark horse, like to win the Big 12, even at plus 500. Like when I look at this team, I'm not confident in a plus 500 bet to even put $10 on it, to be honest.
Yeah. The scary thing is, like you mentioned, the offense, and the two teams they're competing with Oklahoma State and Arizona at the top of the Big 12 are going to put up runs. Like maybe Ben Ada wins Friday, but I don't see them winning a series against either of those teams when Saturday and Sunday have to be shootouts. So I think it's like I said before, Arizona, Oklahoma State, a little bit of a gap, TCU, Kansas State, and then a giant gap to everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the odds for the Big 12, I think there's still so much more value in betting on somebody down the board. I mean, even like an Arizona State plus 600, West Virginia plus 800 should be really good. Kansas plus 2,000, Kansas State plus 2,500. Like, there's no value in betting these short shots, in my opinion.
That's on me. I forgot West Virginia. They're in that kind of second tier too. I still am not used to this. Like that's just a new team in the conference. My bad.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat. All right, Nebraska Corn. What do they have?
Yeah, they don't have much. I mean, Mason McConaughey.
All right. I think when Kier sent me this, I'm pretty sure it said Matthew McConaughey in his write-up.
I think I was thinking, and that I'm glad I caught it. But Mason McConaughey, he came on late.
Not Matthew McConaughey's son.
No relation.
He would have been at Texas as a walk-on.
Twice removed cousin. Yeah. McConaughey, he sat behind Sears last year, like big drop off. They have a lot of momentum from being in the regional for the first time, and God knows when. But I think what's going to keep them relevant is just how bad the Big Ten is. But I don't think that accurately depicts like what this team is. Again, they played big dogs last year, and they kind of put their tail behind their legs and got shown the door pretty quickly. And I think it's going to be the same thing. They have a couple of decent bats, like Gabe Swanson turned it on late, was just hitting home run after home run from the Big Ten tournament on. But Cale Frost coming in from the transfer portal, they'll be okay to Big Ten, and you'll find yourself maybe betting on McConaughey on a Friday night in a nasty series. But outside of that, they're not a real threat to me in a regional by any means.
All right, and around us out, we've got the Troy Trojans sitting in that last spot. Sunbelt, Nick, you mentioned them earlier. You think the Trojans win the Sunbelt? I
do. I really do. I think they're the better team than Coastal this year. Just personally, the offense I don't think it's not going to be as powerful as we've seen Troy have like the last few years, where they've just been banging against like that short field and right. Obviously, everybody, if you don't know who Brooks Bryan is, Make him well known, make him one of those guys that you want to see when he's up to the plate. Dude's fun to watch. Possibly could be one of the top picks in the draft. He's extremely good. Pitching staff, it's a Sun Belt pitching staff. I'm not extremely high on it, but I'm not low on it. There's a reason.
We made some money last year on him. Luke Lyon and Garrett Gaines both, I remember backing.
You make serious weekend bet money on them.
Yeah, that's what they're not bad. My problem here is to make College World Series, like maybe that's one of those, the number is just not high enough for me. Could this, like if you're looking for a dark horse, this is gonna be a fun one that a lot of people play. But the problem is it's also another like geography thing. Look where Troy's located. Like chances are they're going to a regional at LSU, at Tennessee, at name an SEC team. So that's kind of where the problem is. But I do think they probably win the Sun Belt. And it's mostly just because I trust what they're bringing back more than what I trust Coastal's bringing back. I don't know if we're going to talk about them in a bit, but like outside of like Eichhoff, the pitching staff's going to struggle again for Coastal. So I just trust this Troy team more. I think they do win the conference. The number is not terrible. So if you are looking for a conference, like a team to play in this conference, because this is the fifth best conference, or actually this is probably the fourth best conference in the country this year. I think they're better than the Big Ten. I don't think that's really debatable to me. So trust Troy here. But yeah, it's like if that number, it's like you could probably sprinkle Troy and Coastal, because I don't know if anybody really wins it besides the two of them.
All right, a couple other outsiders. We talked about West Virginia a little bit. A new coach, that's going to be probably the biggest topic point. Losing J.J. Weatherholt is right up there at the top. Down Big 12, though. I mean, I think if you've got a pitching staff that could be decent, same kind of goes for Kansas. They lose Reese Dutton, but you've got Don Vogel, who was really good last year. Made some money on both him and Dutton. I think in a Big 12 that's so down, I think any team that has a good solidified ace on Friday night, they're always going to be in contention to win the series, which is going to ultimately make them win the conference. And when you look at Kansas being plus 2,000, I'd much rather take a gamble on them than trying to bet, plus 400 or plus 500 on an Arizona or a Oklahoma State, TCU type team.
I think this scares me with West Virginia. Randy Mazey's not there. I mean, just ultra-talented. He's been there forever. When you look at that team, they were decent last year. Like, they were competitive in each series. That they didn't really get blown out or not show up. But Derek Clark, like, the performance he put on, I mean, that guy literally would have
made it to the Super Regionals.
Like, literally off of him. And you lose J.J. Weatherholt, one of the best second basemen we've seen in a very long time. Derek Clark, again, I mentioned you got to find that guy that is just going to have his arm fall off for you and get you to wherever you need to be. Not worried about the draft. Like, he knows he's not a draft pick, but he's just going to give it all out for you. And he did. And that was incredible to watch in the Chapel Hill Super Regional. And I just, without Randy Mazey there, I understand the coach was in-house hire. Like, he's very familiar with the program, but it's so tough to compete. I just think that's just going to be a transition year for them, and just kind of getting his toes wet as being the main guy now. And after you lose that talent, they're going to be up there towards the top of the Big 12, but I don't know, just with everything that they lost, a new coach, that they can actually win the Big 12. It's tough.
All right, then we've got a couple other ones. Auburn, Coastal Carolina, South Carolina, I just put basically as an honorable mention because you've got one of the most electric bats in the country. In Ethan Petrie, you've got Pulmonary, just a lifelong grower of the game. I mean, spent so many years down at LSU, did a lot of good things. Is this his farewell tour? One of the weirdest hires, in my opinion. But Auburn, I feel like they're always in that conversation of being good, but it's such a tough SEC. Can they be great and make some noise in the postseason? That's going to be a storyline to follow. Coastal Carolina, another one. Nick, I'll let you take over. The Chanticleers, can they recreate that magic that won in the College World Series almost a decade ago now? There are so many good teams that I felt like we could mention here. I know we got some
good cover teams.
Nobody mentioned Kansas State. Nobody mentioned East Carolina. we could talk about this all day long, but what do you like about Coastal Carolina?
Yeah, it's outside of, obviously they bring back Eichhoff, and then
Medley as well.
So like out of their top two guys are going to be okay. It's sort of the depth I'm worried about, and especially in that ballpark. Like everybody's going to know, like obviously Cade Bodine's back. Everybody remembers Blake Barthol, like probably the best one
part
week.
Of the killer bees.
Probably Barthol had probably the best 1 week or 2 week stretches we saw last year when he went absolutely nuts. So everybody knows those two names. They just had to replace a lot. And also Gilmore's not there anymore. So it's going to be a whole new regime kind of taking over. How much are they changing? I know their new coach has been under him for a while and has been the coach in waiting. Like he's been the coach in waiting and knew just when Gilmore's gone, this guy's stepping up. So maybe a whole lot won't change. But the talent that they've had the last few years just isn't, outside of like those top tier guys, I don't think is quite there. I think this is probably the first year where they're not the most talented team in the Sun Belt, which is something to say. So, like I said, it's still between them and Troy. Like, am I going to be shocked if they win the Sun Belt? No, not at all. But it's just one of those where I'm a little bit more down on them than Troy, but I think it's still a top 30 team, top 35 team in the country. And we love those midweek overs.
And Q, you added College of Charleston, UConn. Hats off to our good friend Jeff. The UConn Huskies made it into the God, and then Virginia Tech, another team. It's just a loaded ACC. So I'll keep it short and sweet with Tech. I feel like they're always in that conversation. They're a really good ball club, but can they get over the hump of having enough starters to get you through the grueling ACC schedule and make a postseason push? I think it's just a team to keep an eye on with Brett Renfro.
Yeah, Brett Renfro, local kid in my area, great pitcher, great Friday night guy. That's just kind of all they have right now. UConn, great pitching last year. Very good shot at going to Omaha, down there in Tallahassee. I said it earlier, you take James Tibbs off that team. I think UConn is in Omaha, and we're watching them live. They did bring some offensive guys back, but I think the biggest thing for UConn is bringing back their I'm drawing a blank. There's help me with that. Gabe Van Emon really showed out late, pitched really well. Jim Penners has always had good staffs. And then College Charleston, like they have a lot to play for. I mean, to me, I think they should tournament. Selfishly, Florida probably bumped them out. It was one of the teams in conversation. Sorry, boys. But no, College Charleston, like CAA, I think they're going to dominate because I think they have a lot to prove. They took that non-invite to heart, and they have their offense is going to be pretty powerful this year. Pitching staff, they returned some guys. I think they're a team that is going to be standing on business all season long and really trying to, whether it's blow teams out or, prepare for the midweeks harder than everybody else, prepare for the weekends harder than everybody else. Like they have something to prove. And I think they're a team to watch. I think they could be a serious team that could be a 2-3 seed that gives a lot of problems in a regional.
All right, a look into the Golden Spikes Award, and I've got to give credit where credit's due. I think Johnny Venezia, he commented to Bet Rivers or DraftKings won to hang Charlie Condon last year to win it, and congratulations, he cashed. I can't remember what number he got. It was like 45-1 or something. Looking at this field, I don't think there's any value in backing Arnold or Laviolette.
Don't take
Jace's numbers too short. It's probably not going to be a pitcher unless they have just an unreal year. Scooting on down the board, I think Ethan Petrie, he could be a really good bat in a very mediocre team, which kind of what Charlie Condon was last year because the other guys were just so overshadowed. But Nolan Schubart, I think he is just going to have a really, really good year. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's in that conversation. You've got guys like Drew Burris, who's been around now after jumping off the stat pages with his freshman year. Again, I'm looking at guys that have not a whole lot around them and are going to be in those shootout type games that could win this, just putting up massive numbers. And that, to me, screams Petrie, Schubart, maybe a Jared Jones, depending on how LSU does. So I think there's room down the board to get a little further odds than the short shots there.
I think Max Bellew's a good shot at 8-1. He's just so talented offensively. I think he is going to transition to the SEC with no issues. Canarella, the only thing that concerns me is like he's just a little smaller guy. You kind of need that 20-plus home runs, and I don't know if he can get to 20. I think you could see him in that close to 15 range. And so I think that's going to hurt him. Petrie's strikeouts, I think, hurt him. If he can kind of get those under control, that's going to help a lot, and it's going to make him look better, being really the only guy in the South Carolina offense, so he's going to get all the attention. But I also think this award kind of comes into play. Is your team good? Like, are you guys winning games? I think it matters. You know, it's one of those awards where if your team's making a deep run, you got a good shot if you're the main guy there. And if you're a pitcher, I hate to say it, but if Paul Skeens can't even win it, like you pretty much have no shot.
Rintaro Sasaki, the phenom that shocked the world by going to college, going to Stanford of all places. 30-1. Can I interest either of you?
No. Not until he's only seen Japanese high school baseball pitching. I mean, he did there's some like league he was playing in too, but it's so different. And like he's jumping straight into like the ACC as well. No, could he be great next year? That's probably the bigger question. But no, I especially at that number. I think the number is just based off the name and kind of the excitement around him. But to me, it's like this is Laviolette's to lose. There's a reason he's the favorite. If he's just consistent, I think he gets it just because of the star power. They're going to be the team that everybody's watching every single weekend, has the target on their back. So I think that's one.
Like Dylan Cruz.
Yeah.
Who won it. I mean,
when he didn't have the best stats that year when he won it.
Right.
Because, he was just the guy on a championship team. So, like I said, Q mentioned Canarella. It is an issue. Like I want to play him and I want to think he'll win it, but this has turned into a power award lately. And I don't think he has it. I mean, it's one of those where it's like maybe if he hits 20, if he surprises people and hits 20 and he steals 40 and Clemson the College World Series team, then maybe he's close. Nolan Schubert is a great pick. I think we've mentioned that a couple of times. I don't hate Andrew Fisher here, and this is a little bit homer, but hear me out. Like he hit 20 last year at Ole Miss. I think he hit 16 the year before in his 2 years at Ole Miss.
A lot more protection this year in the lineup.
A lot more protection. He's a lefty hitting Lindsey Nelson. Like nobody's going to be shocked if he hits 30 home runs, which probably puts him, he'll hit over 330 home runs on a team that like we think could be a College World Series team as well. And voters, I think, kind of jibbed Christian Moore, not the Golden Spikes, the SEC Player of the Year, they jibbed Christian Moore. But it's one of those where like Fisher is going to, like it's another one that he's going to have a ton of eyes on him in this offense. He's going to drive in a ton of runs. Like I think they have him hitting fourth in the lineup right now. From what I've seen, like in spring, like from the spring, perfect spot for him. With Gavin Kylan in front of him, like Dean Curley might hit in front of him. So I think that's one that's a little bit sneaky. But it's like for me, it's tough to play anyone on this list. It's almost like you kind of go off this list and take long shot, and you hope like you pick a good team who's going to be like the most powerful guy, like a Hunter Hines. Like who I mentioned earlier, like maybe Mississippi State goes off, maybe Hunter Hines hits 30 because he has that power potential too. So this one's tough, like preseason wise.
Yeah, that was a part of the Big 12 being bad is another reason why I really like Nolan Schubert. I'm not really worried about any of the pitching staff of any of his competition. So I'm not going to be surprised if he put up 30, 35 home runs, which depending on how Oklahoma State, because it is kind of a popularity contest, like Georgia was good last year. I feel like if they don't make the postseason, Condon probably doesn't win it. But again, he was so dominant.
Yeah,
I just feel like Schubert could be in that role this year. We did the 6-4-3 pick 'em. These are not all active bets. These were current odds that we just wanted to consistently provide to everybody what our picks were to make the College World Series. That was the 6. I've got A&M, Arkansas, Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, and UC Santa Barbara. I didn't just want to go all chalk. I had to throw somebody in there. I actually don't think Barbara makes it.
I was gonna say.
As cool as it would be for a mid-major, I feel like they're probably the best mid-major to make it. Maybe they can run into a stagnant offense like a Vanderbilt or somebody and win a super regional. Who knows? But to win the conferences, that's the 4: Virginia, Oregon, Oklahoma State, and A&M. A&M, again, I I'm not going to be surprised if they win it all. I also won't be surprised if they miss Omaha. I think this could be very similar to another team like Arkansas, who never lost a weekend series and got eliminated by NC State in their own backyard in a regional 5 years ago or whenever that was. I need to see them. And then 3 potential winners of the College World Series. I'm going to hang my hat on consistency in pitching. Virginia and North Carolina, they're the consistency. I feel like Scott Forbes and Brian O'Connor are really good coaches. They know how to win. The number is good enough for me to place a preseason bet on. And then Arkansas, Jeff Show, he had 18-1 out there. I feel like if you can get anything higher than 12 or 13-1 on Arkansas, I do think this is the year that they get back to the College World Series. And Dave Van Horn knows you build a team around solid pitching because that's what wins you the College World Series. So we've got it. If the bats can wake up, I feel good about where we're going to be. Q?
Yeah, I'll skip the 6 and the 4. I think, especially the 4 outside of Nick taking Arizona. We're all on the same line there. We talked ad nauseum about them. The 3, the reason I think they can win is Virginia is just so consistent, A&M so talented, and Florida, if the pitching can click, I think they have. You got to have power. You got to have experience. You got to have a head coach, in my opinion, that knows how to win, who's been to Omaha, and I think that is everything Florida has. If in your down years you can, be a Final Four team that speaks volumes. I think they got better offensively, even with the loss of Cat, because I think they're going to be more consistent. And then the talent, like if the pitching can click, they're some of the best arms talent-wise in the SEC, and that's the biggest X factor. So we'll see.
Nick?
Yeah, I'll do the same with Q. Just go to those 3. I'll preface it by saying I wasn't looking at odds when I picked this. I was driving, so I just kind of picked like the 3 that I trusted the most. Tennessee, it really comes down to Tony Vitello, Frank Anderson, Josh Ealand. Got to trust it, being so consistent. So you just kind of have to trust it, and especially like you can get to the College World Series, and then they're a team that is experienced and knows how to get there and win once they're there. So I don't think anybody's shocked if that happens. A&M, best team on paper, hard to leave them off. The number is not good. I probably wouldn't play it, but just because it is like it's so low. But like on paper, this team is head and shoulders above everybody else in the country. So if they are consistent, they play up to like what they're supposed to, this could be a 60-win team, just like Tennessee was last year. And then Oregon State, I mentioned this, like I mentioned, it's more being a West Coast team, and I think they're favored by that. Like they're most likely going to host, I think. They could be a top 8 seed. But I think their path is there to get to the College World Series. And I just mentioned it. If they're that good, that means the starting pitching, it panned out. So if they can get to the College World Series and they're hosting, then who's to say with that offense that they can't win the whole thing?
All right. And then Smitty's plays, he was pretty much the same. He did pick North Carolina to win the ACC over Virginia. No surprise with A&M to win the SEC, but he's got Texas A&M, Florida, and North Carolina in his pick 3. So that wraps it up. An hour and 45 minutes and about 30 teams that we went through. There is baseball in 2 weeks, guys. College baseball is here. No off season for us. It was like college football ended and then baseball had already started. The road to Omaha begins now. So if you have not gone through the guide, familiarize yourself with all these teams, players to know, and more, go check that out. I cannot wait to unveil the website, collegebaseballinsiders.com. It's actually up, but because there's no games being played, we don't have stats, but Nick has done an awesome job with implementing stadium sizes, weather. We've got everything to try to better your handicapping, utilization, the tools to do the matchup preview, compare head-to-head stats, deep, like anything you could think of, we have put it into the website. So really excited about that, and something we'll announce whenever it is live and ready to use. So if you guys don't have anything else, for Q, Nick, and myself, cheers, guys. We made it. College baseball season's here. We'll see you next time.